Lesson 7.4, Video 4. We're going to approach this one a little bit differently by looking at all three terms right away and asking ourselves, do all three have something in common? And they do. They all are divisible by 5. So let's factor out a 5. If we do that, we'll have 2y squared minus 7y plus 6. Now we're not going to forget about the 5, we'll get to that later, but we're going to focus on that trinomial that has fewer terms. So we're going to take 2y squared minus 7y plus 6, and we're going to factor it by grouping. So as before, we are looking for factors that have a product of. We're going to put those two together. So a product of 12 and a sum of negative 7. So 4 and 3 come to mind. And 4 times 3 is 12, but we need a negative 7, so we'll make them negative 4 and negative 3 because the product of those two is still positive 12. So we will rewrite our trinomial as 2y squared minus 4y minus 3y plus 6. And again, our two middle terms replaced our negative 7y. So now we can factor by grouping. So our first two terms have a 2y in common. So if I divide both terms by 2y, I get y minus 2. Our second two terms have a 3 in common, both divisible by 3. And as we said before, when your first term right here is negative, then we should factor out the negative with it. So if I factor out a negative 3, I end up with y minus 2. Again, notice we have the same thing in parentheses, so that's a good sign. So I will factor out y minus 2, and in parentheses I will write what's left, 2y minus 3. Now this is the important part where we have factored that trinomial, but we cannot forget about the 5. And that would just go out front, and that's considered factored. Our next question, try the same thing. Now all three terms do not have a common factor, so we cannot do that part. So we'll go right to factoring by grouping, and we'll say we need two factors that have a product of 4 times 5, so 20, and a sum of negative 3. Now if the factors of 20 are 20 and 1, that will not add up to negative 3. We have 10 and 2. They do not add up to negative 3. And we have 5 and 4. Now notice none of those will give you a sum of negative 3. So this one is not factorable, or cannot factor. And this ends Lesson 7.4, Video 4.